The CFR and their goals. The CFR's 1980's project evolved from a council study group on international order, which had met from 1971-73. They sought to duplicate the success they had achieved with the War and Peace studies, and their concentration was to be on creating a new political and economic system that would have global emphasis. Miriam Camps, former vice chairperson of the State Department's Policy Planning Council, recorded the group's discussion in a report called The Management of Independence, which called for the kind of international system which we should be seeking to nudge things. In the fall of 1973, the 1980's project was initiated, and to accommodate it, the CFR staff was expanded, and additional funds raised, including $1.3 million in grants from the Ford, Lilly, Mellon, and Rockefeller Foundations. The coordinating committee had 14 men, with a full-time staff, plus 12 groups, each with 20 members, in addition to other experts and advisors who acted as consultants to the project. Some of the reports produced: Reducing Global Inequities, Sharing Global Resources, and Enhancing Global Human Rights. Stanley Hoffman, a chief participant of the project, wrote a book in 1978, called Primacy or World Order, which he said was an illegitimate offspring of the project. Basically, it was a summary of the project's work, and concluded that the best chance for foreign policy success was to adopt a world order policy. When Jimmy Carter was elected to the presidency in 1976, some of the project's strongest supporters, such as Cyrus Vance, Michael Blumenthal, Marshall Schulman, and Paul Warnke, went to the White House to serve in the new administration. In 1979, the project was discontinued for being too unrealistic, which meant it was too soon for that kind of talk. The CFR headquarters and library is located in the 5-story Howard Pratt Mansion, a gift from Pratt's widow, who was an heir to the Standard Oil fortune, at 58 East 68th Street, in New York City, on the corner of Park Avenue and 68th Street, on the opposite corner of the Soviet Embassy to the United Nations. They are considered a semi-secret organization whose 1966 annual report stated that members who do not adhere to its strict secrecy can be dropped from their membership. On the national level, the Business Advisory Council and the Pilgrim Society are groups which form the inner circle of the CFR, while on the international level, it's the Bilderbergers. James P. Warburg, banker, economist, a member of FDR's Brain Trust, and son of Paul M. Warburg, of the CFR, told a Senate Foreign Relations Committee on February 17, 1950, "We shall have world government whether or not we like it. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or consent." The Chicago Tribune printed an editorial on December 9, 1950 which said, "The members of the council are persons of much more than average influence in the community. They have used the prestige that their wealth, their social position, and their education have given them to lead their country towards bankruptcy and military debacle. They should look at their hands. There is blood on them, the dried blood of the last war and the fresh blood of the present one." They have only been investigated once, and that was in 1954, by the Special House Committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations, the Reese Committee, who said that the CFR was in essence an agency of the United States government. The committee discovered that their directives were aimed overwhelmingly at promoting the globalistic concept. A July 1958 Harper's Magazine article said, "The most powerful clique in these CFR groups have one objective in common. They want to bring about the surrender of the sovereignty and the national independence of the U.S. They want to end national boundaries and racial and ethnic loyalties supposedly and increase business and ensure world peace. What they strive for would inevitably lead to dictatorship and loss of freedoms by the people." The CFR was founded for the purpose of promoting disarmament and submergence of U.S. sovereignty and national independence into an all-powerful one-world government. On September 1, 1961, the Christian Science Monitor printed the following statement: "The directors of the CFR make up a sort of presidium for that part of the establishment that guides our destiny as a nation." On December 23, 1961, columnist Edith Kermit Roosevelt, granddaughter of President Theodore Roosevelt, wrote in the Indianapolis News that CFR policies favor gradual surrender of United States sovereignty to the United Nations. Researcher Dan Smoot, a former FBI employee, said their goal was to create a one-world socialist system and make the United States an official part of it. Representative John R. Rarick of Louisiana said in 1971, "The CFR, dedicated to one-world government, financed by a number of the largest tax-exempt foundations, and wielding such power and influence over our lives in the areas of finance, business, labor, military, education and mass communication media, should be familiar to every American concerned with good government and with preserving and defending the U.S. Constitution and our free enterprise system. Yet, the nation's right to know machinery, the news media, usually so aggressive in exposures to inform our people, remain conspicuously silent when it comes to the CFR, its members and their activities. The CFR is the establishment. Not only does it have influence and power in key decision-making positions at the highest levels of government to apply pressure from above, but it also finances and uses individuals and groups to bring pressure from below, to justify the high-level decisions for converting the U.S. from a sovereign constitutional republic into a servile member state of a one-world dictatorship. Phyllis Schlafly and Rear Admiral Chester Ward, former Judge Advocate General of the Navy from 1956-60, who was a member of the CFR for 16 years, wrote in their 1975 book Kissinger on the Couch that the CFR's purpose of promoting disarmament and submergence of U.S. sovereignty and national independence into an all-powerful one-world government is the only objective revealed to about 95% of 1,551 members, 1975 figures. There are two other ulterior purposes that CFR influence is being used to promote, but it is improbable that they are known to more than 75 members, or that these purposes ever have even been identified in writing. The book went on to say that the most powerful clique in these elitist groups have one objective in common: they want to bring about the surrender of the sovereignty and the national independence of the United States. Ward's indictment of the group revealed their methods. Once the ruling members of the CFR have decided that the U.S. government should adopt a particular policy, the very substantial research facilities of CFR are put to work to develop arguments, intellectual and emotional, to support the new policy, and to confound and discredit, intellectually and politically, any opposition. The published accounts of CFR activities greatly understate their power and influence on national and foreign policy. They have been called the invisible government or a front for the intellectual leaders who hope to control the world through the Fabian technique of gradualism. Besides their involvement in the government, they hold key positions in all branches of the media, including the control or ownership of major newspapers, magazines, publishing companies, television, and radio stations. The New York Times wrote, "The Council's membership includes some of the most influential men in government, business, education and the press, and, for nearly half a century has made substantial contributions to the basic concepts of American foreign policy." Newsweek called the Council's leadership the foreign policy establishment of the U.S. Well-known political observer and writer Theodore White said, "The Council counts among its members probably more important names in American life than any other private group in the country." In 1971, J. Anthony Lucas wrote in the New York Times Magazine, "If you want to make foreign policy, there's no better fraternity to belong to than the Council." From 1928-72, 9 out of 12 Republican presidential nominees were CFR members. From 1952-72, CFR members were elected 4 out of 6 times. During 3 separate campaigns, both the Republican and Democratic nominee were, or had been a member. Since World War II, practically every presidential candidate, with the exception of Johnson, Goldwater, and Reagan, has been members. The position of Supreme Allied Commander has usually been held by CFR members, like General Dwight D. Eisenhower, General Matthew B. Ridgway, General Alfred M. Gruenther, General Laurie Norstad, General Lyman L. Lemnitzer, General Andrew J. Goodpaster, and Alexander M. Haig Jr. Most of the superintendents at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point have been members. In Senator Barry Goldwater's 1979 memoir, With No Apologies, he wrote, "When a new president comes on board, there is a great turnover in personnel but no change in policy." That's because CFR members have held almost every key position, in every administration, from Franklin D. Roosevelt to Bill Clinton. During that period, every Secretary of State, with the exception of Cordell Hull, James F. Burns, and William Rogers, has been members. Every Secretary of Defense, from the Truman administration, up to the Clinton administration, with the exception of Melvin Laird, has been members. Since 1920, most of the Treasury Secretaries have been members, and since the Eisenhower administration, nearly all of the National Security Advisors have been members. Curtis Dahl wrote in his book, FDR, My Exploited Father-in-Law, "For a long time I felt that FDR had developed many thoughts and ideas that were his own to benefit this country, the USA. But, he didn't. Most of his thoughts, his political ammunition as it were carefully manufactured for him in advance by the CFR One World Money Group."